Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Ron Daniels. I'm president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and convener of the Pan-African Unity Dialogue. And we welcome you to this crucial discussion on the growing crises in Ethiopia, exploring pathways to justice, peace, and reconciliation.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels, and thank you for bringing us all together for this incredibly important conversation. My name is Millete BerhaneMeskel. And I just want to correct, the pronunciation is Tigray. I'm from Tigray. Most of my family is in Tigray. There are a couple of things that I want to say. I appreciate the purpose of this panel, and I can assure you that no one was more Ethiopianist than Tigrayans up until this most recent genocide on the people of Tigray. And I have to say, there's no way for a Tigrayan to put the state before the people. So we're not here for the dismemberment or the dissolution or the breakup of Ethiopia. However, we cannot put a state before the people. And you would not either if it was your mother who was being raped or your brother who's being shot and thrown over a cliff. So I want to be very, very clear about that. And I already know the comments are going to be full. I'm used to it, especially after a year of she's paid by TPLF. She's an agent of TPLF. She works for them. They're there, to destroy Ethiopia. None of it is true. So let me just say that and put that out there. I also want to say there's a lot of talk about, Western influence and neo-colonialism and neoliberalism and all of that. Let me just tell you that the first person to liberalize the Ethiopian economy is Abiy Ahmed himself. He has sold literally every national, asset that was, listen, I remember a decade ago or so trying to start a business or for some family in Ethiopia, and you could not even literally own land if you were not an Ethiopian, or you couldn't prove your heritage and your descendancy. That's how much the previous government, EPRDF, was anti-imperialism. Now, pretty much every national asset has been sold to outsiders, including all of the mining rights in Tigray. And that's why you have countries like Canada who refuse to speak up about the genocide, because they were basically paid off to not say anything. So there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation about what is actually happening in Tigray and in Ethiopia. And it's important that we bring everyone to the table so you could hear, especially folks who are at the center of what's happening. So that's really important to me. Tribalism has been an issue in Ethiopia from its origin. And so to suggest that that's something new is also very false. Ethnic federalism was an answer to tribalism because various minority ethnic groups were being forced to sort of blend into one national identity. And it was erasure. It was an act of erasure on indigenous Africans. Just so you know, Haile Selassie himself owned slaves. The darker you were, the more likely you were to be a slave. So you can't, the history and the story about Ethiopia never being colonized isn't an honest one. Ask an Oromo what their opinion is about that. So we have to come to a truth and reconciliation moment about the truth of Ethiopia and how we got here and why every couple of decades there's a genocide on a group of people. And that's why Marcus Garvey, by the way, did not like and wrote about Haile Selassie. And it was because he owned slaves. So let me just tell you, because I want to recenter and bring this back to the people, because that's why we're here. So for over a year now, Tigray has been under siege. The story you'll hear is that Tigrayans attacked the base, but it was a failed coup on the leadership of Tigray. The constitution in Ethiopia allows each region to elect its own government. And then they are loosely governed by a federal government, by the federal government. This war is really a political conversation. It should have been a political conversation at a table. Do you want a strong central government or do you want a weak central government? A fair question, and one that comes up in any so-called democracy, I guess, around the world. But instead, what happened is that for the 2 years prior to the so-called base attack, there's been a low-grade aggression on the people of Tigray. The Ethiopian government denied them their budgetary allowances. There's a huge locust invasion in the northern part of Ethiopia, and everyone in the north was given their tools to fight locusts except Tigrayans. And it continued. That type of COVID came. Tigrayans were not given PPE to fight COVID. And so there's been this low-grade aggression. The roads have been blocked, so supplies can't get into the region. And then there was the so-called base attack. Even though preparations for that war had started at least 10 days prior, there were troop movements, and we knew that Eritreans were coming to the border in order to help the prime minister attack the people of Tigray. Since then, there have been dozens and dozens and dozens of documented massacres on the people of Tigray. You have no services in all of Tigray. I mean, no running water, no electricity, no internet, no phones. We're in the middle of a pandemic and the people have no running water. No food is coming into the region. Eritrean soldiers came in and gang raped women, gang raped children. The youngest rape victim on record is 4 years old. Why do the people of Ethiopia allow their government to commit these crimes in their name? They should be outraged. They should be completely outraged. Even if the base attack actually happened, let's say it did happen, that is military on military. Why are the people having to pay the price for that? Collective punishment is illegal and immoral, and everyone should stand against that, regardless of who you are or where you are. I've lost 9 family members in the Tigray genocide, 9 in the first 6 months of this war. For the last 6 months, we have no contact with anyone. So we don't even know what's happening now. We know we get these weak reports about 200 children have died of starvation, according to one hospital. Well, all of the hospitals have been destroyed in Tigray by Eritrean and Ethiopian and Amhara militias. There are no hospitals. You only have one that can give you any type of information. So if 200 are dying where you can get information, what do you think the death toll is in areas where you can't get information about what's happening? What's happening to the people of Tigray is a travesty of biblical proportions. Everyone should care. We should not be putting the state of Ethiopia above the people. Pan-Africanism is about Africans helping Africans, not about uplifting a state structure. Ethiopians in Ethiopia or in the diaspora try to use Black Lives Matter. BLM is a movement against state violence. The state of Ethiopia, what Ethiopians are doing is supporting state violence. You cannot use BLM for that argument. It flies in the face of it. So this conversation is incredibly important. I'm glad that we're having it, but there's a lot of realities and a lot that we need to address. It is a genocide. That's not an exaggeration. If you look at the 10 steps of genocide, everything has happened from dehumanization to classification to discrimination. I don't have to tell you because you just got a great summary about what's happening to Tigrayans in the capital city of Addis Ababa. They're being rounded up and put in concentration camps. So stop blaming white people in the West for what Africans are doing. We are responsible for the carnage that is happening in Tigray. We have to deal with that. We have to address that. You can hate me if you want, but I'll tell you, if it was your mother who was being killed, your sister who was being raped, or your family who was being starved, I hope you would be as loud as I am. So thank you for this conversation. And by the way, you mentioned there's no Oromo representation here, but this whole movement, the whole movement of getting rid of EPRDF was Oromo youth who came out and protested. And now all of their leaders have been jailed. This is a fascist regime that claims to have been democratically elected when half of the country was in the middle of war and couldn't vote, or the other half only had one person on the ballot. So we have some serious issues as Africans to talk about. We must protect African people, not African states, arbitrary states that were created, by colonialism. Let's be real. And we have to deal with this. We have to come together. And I believe that we can as Africans, but we can't do it if we're going to ignore what's happening. The African Union had a whole campaign called Silence the Guns, while Abiy Ahmed was dropping bombs in Tigray, and we're afraid to bring up that conversation. So this is a powerful and brave conversation. I know the comments, people are going wild, and that's fine. I hope you care, because if you don't care, it means you're numb, and you shouldn't be numb. So I thank you. I look forward to being able to reach my family eventually. And there's a lot of criticism about the Tigray Defense Forces marching to Addis Ababa. And look, we've asked Abiy Ahmed over and over again, lift the siege. Turn the water on, turn the electricity on, turn the power on. The people are literally dying of starvation. Allow the food to come in. There's no food in Tigray because the Eritreans burned the farms. There's a long history of problems between the people of Tigray and Eritreans. We're brothers, we're sisters, by the way, but that's a conversation for a whole different day. Lift the siege. The reason TDF is marching to Addis Ababa is because that's where the problem is, in Arat Kilo. We're not talking about the people along the way. I'm not going to sit here and say that nothing has been done wrong along the way there, but we demand independent investigations in order to address all of those things. You can't have a person who's party to the conflict also do the investigations. That's unreal. So we hope for those investigations, and we hope that this regime will be toppled so that the people can eat. That's what we want, the survival of our families. And that's what we're fighting for. Nothing more, nothing less. It's such a shame because there's a dehumanization effort around Tigrayans to say things like that we're not Ethiopian, or I've even heard wild things about other ethnic groups that they came from Madagascar and they're really, I mean, there's just all these crazy narratives about who Tigrayans are to exclude us from the story of Ethiopia, even though Tigray is at the heart of Ethiopia. You talked about El Najashi Mosque in Tigray. You talk about, all of the things, the Battle of Adwa, the famous battles where colonialists were fought and beat back, all in Tigray. But the story is always, well, they're not real Ethiopians. Even in the comments here, people I respect, like Adama Baraka saying things like, this conversation should include Ethiopians. Are we not Ethiopians? Are Tigrayans not Ethiopians? I mean, this is a very frustrating question. So when you talk about the integrity of the state doesn't even recognize us as Ethiopians. So if Tigray is somehow secedes from Ethiopia, it's by force and by the state's hand, not by ours.